Good morning. I want to welcome everyone participating in today's webinar. My name is Trevor Williams, and I'm a nonprofit audit partner at Gelman, Rosenberg Freedman. I'd like to start off today with some quick housekeeping items and explain what you will need to do in order to earn CPE credit. Participants seeking CPE credit today must complete and submit a short evaluation survey that will appear automatically immediately following the webinar. You will be asked to recall these words in order to receive credit. Please write down the CPE words when they are given and keep them until you receive your certificate. They will not be provided again. If you have any technical questions or issues during the webinar, please use the questions function to speak with our webinar administrator for assistance. The slide deck and recording from today's webinar will be available for download at the link shown here. You will also receive a follow-up email with direct links. Technical support and CPE questions may be addressed to Dominic Acosta at dacosta@grfcpa.com. Today's learning objective is to understand earned revenue and how diversified revenue streams are essential for nonprofit organizations, and one CPE credit is available for this webinar. You know, I am super excited for this particular webinar because I believe this is the first month we've experimented and done something a bit different. Rather than covering hot topics such as new accounting pronouncements, data security, tax reform, tax strategies, etc., today's webinar is more of a discussion interview format. With that being said, I am happy to introduce Sarah Gibson, co-founder and CEO of 20 Degrees, to discuss securing alternative revenue streams to meet tomorrow's mission. Sarah, before we get into today's topic, could you tell us a bit about yourself, your organization, and how you help nonprofit organizations?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's really nice to be here with you today. So I spent most of my career in nonprofits, a little bit of time in the for-profit world, but mostly as a fundraiser. And I actually really liked raising money for nonprofits. I was one of those people. But what I found, as well as my partner, is that the type of money needed for tomorrow just wasn't adequate for what the nonprofits needed. The business model just wasn't there. And so we started our firm to help connect nonprofits to new forms of capital so that they could really move past a scarcity mindset. What we saw increasingly was that many nonprofits were working in scarcity and on this hamster wheel of the type of money that wasn't helping them really explore their mission, and that the new type of opportunities, this new money, was flowing increasingly to a small number of people, largely because of knowledge, expertise, and capacity. That's what we wanted to solve.
Excellent, excellent. Well, as we all know, many charitable organizations have spent much of 2018 and 2019 worrying about how the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 would affect taxpayers' eagerness to continue charitable giving. Although tax reform led to minimal change in the charitable giving deduction, which taxpayers can take only if they itemize, the law substantially increased the standard deduction, which could mean fewer people will itemize. Sarah, based on your research, how has charitable giving affected nonprofits?
Well, what we are seeing is that the current environment, especially as a result of the tax law, is at best uncertain and is really not great news for small and mid-sized nonprofits. The data that we're seeing right now is that organizations under $1 million are seeing a drop of about a little over 2%. And that's in part because they tend to rely on small and mid-sized donors, which for reasons that we don't know why, and we don't know if it's permanent, but those donations have been reduced. And the large organizations, 10 million and above, they are seeing an increase in donations, about the same amount. Mm-hmm. Those donors are, they are itemizing, they are giving. But that said, it's not even great news there, because even the larger donations, they aren't keeping pace with inflation, which I think we'll see. Just the donor pool in general is shifting. And that we all are also seeing that donor advised funds did have a great year in 2018. And so we look to see that those also tend to be more attractive to larger organizations.
Okay. And just to add to that, Sarah, based on what we've been seeing thus far in 2018, many of our clients have not seen a big drop in charitable giving, but based on what we've been hearing, there is concern for 2019 due to various reasons. First, the government shutdown that we all remember from earlier this year, the stock market volatility, and many Americans will have had a chance at this point to see the effect on their tax return of itemizing due to charitable contributions versus not contributing and taking a standard deduction.
Yeah, I think that's right. I will say we're a little confused about the motivations around taxes. People said it was the number 5 reasons why they gave, but maybe there's a little piece there that we don't quite understand. And what we're also seeing the same thing is that people are making up the difference right now up from the smaller donations with larger donations, but they're not feeling psychologically safe about their donors and their revenue portfolio. So it's just about really this uncertainty. Definitely not a time to panic, but a time to really sense that something may be changing, and it may just always be different. We don't know yet.
Exactly. So with these times of funding uncertainty in the nonprofit community, I think we all can agree it's even more important to have great leadership, not only in the role of president or executive director, but also with those charged with governance as well as business development. Because of this uncertainty, Sarah, have you seen any effect on employee turnover, morale, et cetera? And what can organizations do to hire and retain good people at both the organizational and at the board level?
Yeah, I think this is a little more of the things are hard out there. We will get to solutions, but we have some pretty hard hitting data here in the beginning. This is a study from 2013. It was a national study about development talent, which we know is very hard to come by and critical. It is often a revenue driver for nonprofits. And what we're seeing is that there just aren't as many people who are necessary. They aren't the caliber of people who are necessary, and they often aren't staying, and they're leaving the field entirely. This is not great news for the sector. But there are ways out of this. Certainly being good to your people, having a culture of philanthropy, which means really that everyone is involved. And there was a follow-on study to this study that really gave some very tactical pieces. And then also moving into social entrepreneurship. What we're finding is that the young talent is interested in social entrepreneurship more so than perhaps scrubbing donor lists and things like that. So just opening up a job description can be really interesting, and that really gives a window into this alternative revenue that can really be exciting and a great job.
Exactly. Of the 600 plus nonprofit organizations that we work with, many often ask, how do we compare to similar organizations, and what are other organizations similar to us doing to increase its revenues? Sarah, I know this is where your expertise lies. So when asked with a question such as these, how would you respond?
Well, I always like to go to data. And this is one of our favorite sources. We saw this, Social Startup Success is a great book. And this slide really talks about how the data is pretty clear. If you want to grow, odds are at some point you need another form of revenue besides contributed and besides donations. And it is really the key to breaking that $2 million mark. And frankly, just have more room to move after $2 million bucks. And so whether that is a government contract, whether that is earned revenue, whether that is there are different ways to think about it, but to get over that hump, this is how I like to look at it.
Okay.
Additionally, in addition to the growth, you get other things when you're looking at forms of revenue besides contributed income. You have a chance for the market to tell you, is it working? Do they like what you're giving? One of our favorite books at 20 Degrees is Lean Impact, and they talk about, do your people refer and prefer you? And that also means your constituents.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so you get a feedback loop if they're even paying a small amount at times. It also changes your power dynamics with funders, which can allow you to just speak more freely and really develop better programming. And you also have a chance to identify your strengths and to name it. So it isn't about the money, it's about reinforcing your mission.
Exactly. I always tell people it takes creativity, commitment, and hard work to solve income challenges. And each funding source obviously has its advantages and drawbacks. And regardless of which one you select, they all take effort, focus, as well as investment.
Absolutely. Sometimes people rush through new revenue ideas.
Mm-hmm.
One of the mistakes that we help people to
We have now come to our first polling question. What is your organization's top funding source? A, individual donations. B, foundation and/or government grants. C, sponsorship. D, E, selling goods and services. Please take a moment now to answer. While participants are submitting their answers, I will provide the first CPE word. The first CPE word is revenue. Again, if you want to receive CPE credit, please jot these words down because you will need them for the survey following the webinar. Again, the first CPE word is revenue, REVENUE. All right. Well, it looks like the majority seems to be under B, foundation and/or government grants. It's interesting because, in addition to finding the answer to this particular question, we selected this question to spark your interest in exploring options so that you can start choosing your ideal funding source and make a decision. What is your ideal mix? Which ones will be your main sources of income? And which ones will you utilize only occasionally?
I think to speak directly to the crowd favorite of foundation and government grants, I think the alternative revenue really is appealing, in part because we know that those grants are here today and can actually be gone tomorrow with very little notice.
Even faster than that, Sarah. I say here today, gone today.
Oh yeah, and that's stressful, certainly. So while doing that, it can help. And also some foundations are really interested in seeding some of this. Also, there's possibility of helping foundations to unlock the other 95% of their capital through some of this, through some creative uses. So it allows for a new type of partnership, particularly with foundations.
Okay. So before deciding on which alternative revenue source to choose, what are some of the basics, Sarah, that one should consider?
A couple things. One is that we really believe that your alternative, whatever new type of money you're looking at, should have a positive effect on your organization. Start from a place of mission. And two, that it should generate money. It may take some time to be fully profitable, as any good business venture would, but the goal should be to make money.
Absolutely. So we see here, have a couple different business models with regards to the earned revenue. Sarah, could you briefly talk about each of these and advantages or disadvantages of each?
Yeah, we'll go through these pretty quickly. And the idea is an earned revenue is basically a micro business within your nonprofit. And there's lots of ways to think about it. And you should start from thinking about what does your organization do really well.
Exactly.
And so don't go inventing something or outsourcing or any of that. Start with a strength-based approach. And is it something that a mission-related product? If you are an advocacy organization, do you have a conference that you are really good at? If you are a homeless service organization and you are really good at case management, is there a government, a state agency who needs that and you become a contractor rather than a grantee? If you've got some very specific knowledge in the education field or medical field, there's there's a technical assistance piece that someone may want to pay you for rather than just, again, for grants or even individual donors. If in education, licensing a curriculum, And that gives all sorts of options. And the fourth one, monetizing your fixed assets. If you have real estate, if you have equipment if you have a kitchen, things that other people need, we like to call it finding your piano. Is there an underutilized hard asset that the community needs? Now, all of these are easier said than done, and they take time, they are wear and tear, they take staff time, but they're options. And in all of these, if done well and you receive money for them, it is unrestricted income, which we know is what nonprofits need more than anything. Money that can be spent on people, on things, and without strings.
Absolutely.
The market feedback on the mission. It also, if you are showing diversity of revenue, you're going to get both program and development staff. And it also tends to attracts money. So it also helps you find some new capital. Obviously, the disadvantages, it is time consuming to start a new thing, particularly something that involves revenue. You need to make sure your stakeholders are aligned. You have to put some money up front into it. These things don't get started for free. It does increase personnel, particularly if it's done well. And you have to be prepared that it might not work. That's a very real risk, and we think it should be named up front.
Absolutely. Okay. So at this time, we've now come to our second polling question. What percent of your funding is from one source? A, 0 to 10%, B, 11 to 20%, C, 21 to 30%, D, 31 to 40%, or E, over 40%? Again, please take a moment now to answer. While participants are submitting their answers, I'll provide the second CPE word. The second CPE word is board. If you want to receive CPE credit, again, please put this word down because you will need it at the end following this webinar. Again, the second CPE word is board, B-O-A-R-D, board. Wow. As the results are coming in, it looks like roughly about 60% of the respondents have selected E, over 40%. That's a little concerning because I would say in general, it's advisable for nonprofits to never receive more than 40% of funding from any one source. If an organization loses that 40% of this revenue, it may have to restructure in order to survive.
We are finding that is one of the motivators of a lot of people reaching out to us, because they just realize that missions are at risk when one funder or one small series of decision makers controls too much of the future of their mission. But this is that power dynamic piece.
Right.
It just creates a better situation for everyone when everyone could be real partners of this.
Exactly. Okay. Well, as part of today's webinar, in addition to speaking about the impact of the Tax Cuts and Job Acts of 2017 on charitable giving, we also wanted to discuss another one of the programs created by this act, the Opportunity Zones. Sarah, could you briefly touch on this program and how you anticipate it affecting the nonprofit community, if at all, and whether this could be an alternative revenue source for them?
Absolutely. So Opportunity Zones are a tax incentive. They are not a program, and they could move up to $6 trillion to low income census tracts across the nation. So why this and how this affects nonprofits? Well, these are areas that nonprofits are often the strongest actors in. These are areas where opportunity is not equally distributed, and we really just believe that any way a nonprofit can help direct new money to a community and keep the money in the community, that's something that is important. So quick overview of Opportunity Zones. I also want to just say up top, this is complicated stuff. If you are near an Opportunity Zone, you think you might be, you will probably have to check into this more than once. So I'm going to give you a very high level primer. But I'd really recommend you checking out the tool Enterprise 360, type in your address, find out where the nearest Opportunity Zone is to see if this is, see how close geographically it is. So two things, so there's two pieces of it. First, it's a tax incentive, and there's a couple key pieces. You can only take capital gains and put them into a fund. And in that, the fund, you as an investor, you get up to 3 incentives. 1, deferral of your tax. 2, a 10 to 15% reduction in your taxes as long as you're invested from 5 to up to 7 years. And 3, the fund, whatever you're invested in, you get to keep your earnings tax-free if you are invested for up to 10 years.
Wow.
So we can see why it was very much a bipartisan bill sponsored by Booker and Scott.
So it sounds like it's definitely going to be an incentive, not only for the experienced real estate investor, but also for new entrants as well.
Yeah, and we really think the business play is the really interesting thing, because where do these funds invest? They can only invest in qualified, in opportunity zones. So these are low-income census tracts that were decided by the governors and certified by the Treasury in all 50 states, as well as Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. They're already set. They were set last year. They will not change. And there's also no reason to think that the investors will invest in them equally. So what we're really seeing right now is that states and localities are moving to be attractive to investors. So California's doing a great job, Colorado, Tulsa, Oklahoma, the state of Maryland. And this is where nonprofits, advocates, community organizers, really speaking on behalf and alongside and really helping to elevate the community voices. And if you are a nonprofit, you can absolutely participate. While nonprofits can't directly accept equity investments, you can certainly have an LLC, you can form partnerships. You need to have your board at the table early and often. So this stuff's complicated. I would say go find a great tax lawyer for your board and do as much reading as you can.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Sarah, this has been quite informative to our listeners, but I'm sure many of them are sitting there thinking to themselves, so where do we begin? If asked questions such as that, how would you respond?
Well, there's, like Glenda the Good Witch says, it's always best to start at the beginning. It's a little nod to a hometown piece there. And start with some basic questions up top. Your board. They are the leaders, and this, when talking with revenue models and funding, these questions go better and easier if your board feels that they are really with you in it from the beginning. You don't have to have the whole board, but find your allies. And do they feel informed? What sort of knowledge do they need to know? And what can you learn together? 2, commitment. Do you as the leader or as the leadership team have time to devote to this, or is just going to be one more thing? This is hard. It's certainly very, very doable, but it's just when people are so stretched for capacity, it's just important that you make the time. 3, resources. You need a little bit of money and at least one staff member besides the leader to help move some of the stuff forward. Culture. Is your organization ready for something new? These ideas can be taken offline accidentally by program staff who don't feel like they were brought in the beginning, a board who doesn't fully feel informed. So make sure that your culture is aligned enough. And then finally, risk tolerance. The risk of these things not working right out of the gate is real. So have you normalized a culture where learning and pivoting and sometimes yourself in the beginning?
Right, absolutely, absolutely. You know, Sarah, one of the, I guess it was under the culture aspect of it. And when you talked about including everyone within your respective organization to get their feedback so that they feel involved and they feel empowered with your respective organizations to actually go out and achieve that ultimate goal, which is producing a positive alternative revenue stream.
Yep. The data says that the best ideas are the people who are closest to your mission and closest to the people you're working to serve. So they are busy. Our frontline staff are always super busy, but they have great ideas and bringing them to the table. So this just doesn't feel like a money thing over there, but it's really mission enhancing. It's really an opportunity.
Yeah. And I would say from an auditing perspective, one of the things that we're required to do as part of the audit is to have interviews with various individuals in the respective organization. And a lot of times what I do in having these communications with staff is get ideas from them, not only, the required questions if there's actual or alleged instances of fraud or misappropriation of assets, but get an idea of what their job responsibilities are. And having communications like that with the staff, I find oftentimes I get really good suggestions from the staff on how a particular policy or procedure could be changed or amended or revised to help the organization run more efficiently or effectively. And sometimes, for whatever reason, the staff never brings it to management's attention. So again, I think with regards to this particular endeavor, it's definitely advantageous to include the staff. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So what are our practical considerations? How would your organization need to cover all its bases?
I think this is our shared disclaimer. This is not official financial or tax advice. We always at 20 Degrees really feel like it is important to make sure you have people on your board who have the expertise to help you get this right, from taxes to accounting to HR to legal. You want to make sure that when you are going into something new with dollars, that you are shorn up, that you are prepared, that you're not exposing yourself to any unnecessary risk. So just from the get-go, as you're doing this, bring in the smart people who are really looking for opportunities to help nonprofits do interesting and new things. Don't assume it's an ask. It might be an opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So at this particular time, it looks like we have now come to our final polling question. What do you think will be your organization's greatest hurdle implementing an alternative revenue stream? A, board, B, commitment, C, resources, D, culture, or E, risk tolerance? Again, please take a moment to answer. While participants are submitting their answers, I'll provide the final CPE word. The final CPE word is resource. Again, if you want to receive CPE credit, please jot this down because you will need it for the survey following the webinar. Again, the final CPE word is resource. RESOURCE. Wow. And as to be expected, the leader in the responses is C, resources. Again, as you said, Sarah, that saying, it takes money to make money. So I would have expected a large number of the respondents to say just that.
Well, I think there's actually some good news, though, if I can sort of turn that answer a little bit on its head, is that for major, or not even for major donors, I think just about every grant application I've ever filled out had some sort of question about sustainability. And I never really had a super great answer. It was some version of, when you leave, I'll find another you to replace you. This really gives an opportunity to talk about something new. And don't underestimate the appetite and openness for a donor who may not even be a major donor yet to seed a venture. We certainly hear that, though. I don't want to be Pollyanna about how hard this is and finding those first bit of dollars. But that said, don't let the dollars be the impediment. There's so much, both in pro bono and just the capacity to start. And as you are starting to talk about this, my direct experience is that funders and donors and board members look at you differently just by talking about this, even before you're able to really move on it.
So creativity is definitely the key.
Yeah, and you're rewarded for it.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. This particular slide, Sarah, I must be honest with you. When I first had the opportunity to take a look at it, I was a bit unclear of what a process to find your piano actually meant. And earlier in this webinar, you also made that similar statement, that process to find your piano.
Yeah.
For me personally, I was more interested in a process to finding that alternative revenue stream.
Well, it's about putting something to work.
Right. So, after briefly looking into it and doing a bit of research, I think I got it. A process to find your piano is merely a metaphor for providing a blueprint to guide you as you navigate from coming up with an idea to building a successful business. Am I correct here?
Yeah, absolutely. And the piano reference is something that is sitting around and you might not think of it as an asset. And it certainly isn't an asset that is starting to work for you. So that piano that you have to dust off in the back, just dust it off. And the lean canvas is a great tool.
Okay.
When you've identified some possibilities, and not just the leadership, but frontline staff, board members, this works great for boards. It's meant to be done quickly. When you are exploring new types of revenue, it's a great brainstorming activity for the beginning of a board meeting even. Have people fill this out on their own or in pairs, and it really just walks people through the basics of a business plan. So rather than going full out on a business plan, you can do this just a quick one, and then you can see what sort of ideas you have. What we find is that organizations generally have a small handful of ideas that they actually think are worth pursuing, and then you can choose from even the down select from there. So, but this is just a starting place. So we wanted to give this tool. It's free. You can find it online, and it's a great tool to engage people.
Very interesting. Thank you for that. Okay, so how do we move forward?
This is our process, and it is counterclockwise, which we know is hard for some people to read. So just to make sure everyone's paying attention.
Exactly.
First, it's a formal working group. Don't try and do this alone. We recommend a group of kind of 3 to 7, so there's some redundancy there. 2, work through the steps. Have a process. Complete a lean canvas. Get market feedback. Focus groups, surveys. Doesn't have to be hard, but just get some immediate feedback. How is this working? Would the beneficiaries, would the customers, if you will, want this? And then 3, begin to really test this idea with donors, with your board, and then build the cheapest possible version, your minimum viable product. Don't build a Cadillac if you don't know how to drive yet. How cheap can you get away? People will buy an imperfect product, which is hard to imagine, particularly when you're used to only putting out the highest quality of programs, but you really need the market feedback to get it right.
Okay. So let me ask you this, Sarah. With regards to this particular slide, would you say that it's imperative for organizations to put deadlines with regards to each one of these steps and when you should have responses in it?
If you want to stay on track. And also be flexible within there. Things do come up, and this work, what we are finding, remains at a sort of a slow simmer on the background. This is not work that should be undertaken in the midst of a crisis. It will not work. This is strategic work that should unfold over time, somewhere between 4 to 6 months and a year to 18 months, depending on how your full calendar is and really how far you want to get. But put some time frame, put some accountability, name it to your board. So that way, because like anything, if it is not urgent, it gets put in a drawer.
You know, one of the things you just mentioned, I think, is key. You know, to go through this process in the middle of a storm within your organization, it's probably not the smartest thing to do. And that, if, you know, the storm has to do with very low revenue, it's probably too late at this particular time.
Yeah, I mean, never waste a good crisis as reason to do this planning, but you need to be stable to think. Okay.
Well, Sarah, do you have any additional advice, any do's or don'ts?
Yeah, I think this is more or less some of what we talked about, but don't do this alone. Seek out partnerships. This is a great time to find adjacent organizations and those tax lawyers we had talked about, or those accountants. Find the best talent that you can afford to help you with this as you're whenever you are looking to hire. Do find a way to make this new venture a full part of your mission. It should not be a separate thing. And don't underplan. Don't underinvest. We recognize rarely can you give it all the time, the money, and attention. Do the best you can, not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, but recognize that underinvesting in the beginning will decrease the odds of it succeeding. And finally, don't underestimate the time to profitability. Really manage the expectations of your board. Businesses take on average 2 years to be profitable. Don't really have a completely separate time frame for your venture.
Okay. All right, so it sounds like in addition to those do's and don'ts, you got some further reading for everyone.
Absolutely. These are some of my favorite. The Lean Impact book we had I'd referenced earlier around, really, it's really one of my favorite books. And it takes the idea of the lean startup, but adapts it to nonprofits and social ventures. It's really worth the read. And then there's a number of other articles that are specific for earned revenue. They're just good reading. And number 5, the business model generation. I feel like this is made for boards, so for that working group to really dive in different types of modeling and different, but it's really creative. It's certainly approachable. And then the SBA.gov, it's a great online business planning tool. This is when you're ready to move past the lean canvas into a little more of an intentional plan. It's just a nice tool.
Okay. Would you say that these reads are an easy read or pretty detailed?
These are all approachable.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
All right, so at this particular time, we have a few minutes remaining of the webinar for some questions. Okay, looks like we have a question with regards to the donor advised funds. And it reads, I noticed you mentioned donor advised funds having a banner year due to bunching. Could you explain what donor advised funds are and what is meant by bunching?
Absolutely. I can pop in on the donor advised fund if you want to take the bunching piece since what you can talk about what you've seen on the audit side. There is really donor advised funds it can be thought of as personal charitable savings accounts. And in them, a donor will make a contribution of cash or stocks, and they can take an immediate tax deduction. The account is controlled by a sponsoring organization. It can be a community foundation. It can be a company like a Vanguard or a Schwab. Mm-hmm. And then the donor advises that entity on who they give the money to. Almost always they do take their advice as long as they are a qualified nonprofit. And the key is it cannot be revoked. Once you give it, it is theirs and you direct. There are some very specific rules around whether or not it can be used to pay pledges and galas and things like that. So it is a tool for giving that is growing in popularity, and there's no reason to think that it will slow down. For a lot of people, it's a very cost-effective way to create individual foundations and really giving vehicles.
Okay, and I remember in the webinar, one of the slides you talked about kind of unclear at this particular time about 2019. Could you talk a bit about more on that, on where you think ultimately at the conclusion of 2019, how they
It seems like there was some motivation to inspire people to give up to 3 years of their dollars to the donor advised fund in 2018. I believe what we will see is a drop in assets, or at least what we could see is fewer assets going in perhaps in 2019. So we think people bunched their donations. So I guess we'll just see how this all sort of works out from here.
Okay. And in response to the second part of that particular question about bunching, bunching is the technique where you bundle multiple years of donations into 1 year to help make sure that your itemized deductions exceed that standard deduction. So it's kind of a tax strategy, if you will. Okay, looking at an additional question. Of the business models you mentioned, which one do you recommend the most? I'll turn this one over to you, Sarah.
I think like anything, it really depends on the organization, and each one will be different. Where 20 Degrees stands is it really is about starting with what you do well, a real strength-based approach. What is it that you have in abundance? Is it real estate? Is it expertise? Is it specialized knowledge? That said, if you are struggling, data says that most successful earned revenue opportunities for nonprofits tend to be fee for service. So start there.
Mhm.
And really it's about a process, in our opinion, about really sitting down and being intentional across your organization and identifying as many potential strengths as you possibly can, from hard assets to relationships to intellectual property. And it's really amazing how organizations, when being asked to name their strengths, the opportunities that they can unearth. Because so many nonprofits, so many of us for so many years lived in this scarcity mentality. And by flipping it on its head, even in a conversation, opportunities do come.
Right, right. Okay. Got another question here. How can nonprofits better position themselves to attract funding from millennials and future generations? Ooh, that's a good one.
That is. All right, we'll give me the question one more time.
How can nonprofits better position themselves to attract funding from millennials and future generations?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love millennial and young donors. They're awesome. I think there's a lot of things there. A couple things. One, this social enterprise is really perfect for nonprofits. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a quick second. So for millennials, for the younger donors, having something that they grew up in this notion of social venture. I mean, they are making their buying decisions based on a more complex set of decisions. So having any part of your mission that they can support, they're going to. Two, they require different forms of communication. Your communication shop just has to be top notch.
Right.
They also have, making the assumption that millennials don't have dollars is a mistake. I think, as we want to know, we're in the middle of the biggest wealth transfer ever. And we, 7 Gen Xers in there. There's a lot of us are getting skipped over, and that there's a lot of influence coming. They have been at the table. They care a lot about social justice. This is just be at the table, take people seriously, invite them in. I find them to be smart, committed, and really able to be worked with. We're all in on the youth.
Okay. Yeah, again, I think it takes you back to, the organizations definitely have to be creative in how they, market to the millennials in order to get those contributions from them. So, and
quickly, the millennials are becoming the middle manager and the leaders by now. And really, we have to start thinking about Gen Z, who are even more savvy, and they really are digital natives in every way, shape, and form. So I think it's about communication strategy. I think it's about being clear about your value proposition. I think it's about being transparent and giving opportunities for actual engagement and a seat at the table. They are not going to wait 20 years to have a voice. Right.
Great. Thank you for that. That's a great response. Okay. Got an opportunity zone question. Have opportunity zones been around a long time? Do I need to live in an opportunity zone to take advantage of the tax benefits?
Opportunity zones are quite a thing. So I can give a little more color around the opportunity zone piece in general. So opportunity zones are brand new. They were part of the 2017 new tax law. A lot of people do confuse or conflate them with the Kemp program of yesteryear. These are not empowerment zones, even if there's some overlapping. And this is not a program, it's an incentive. So do you need to live in an opportunity zone to take advantage of them? No. But I'm going to respond to them 2 ways. But if you do live in an opportunity zone, we need you at the table. And there's really a whole variety of options that really present themselves to you. One, your voice is critical. Make sure your local representative knows that you live there and that you care, that your state representative, and that you are before the end of the year, most of this money is, not most, but a good chunk of this money is going to move because there's some really important time clocks that are going to be running out. And so the people who live in opportunity zones, particularly if they're homeowners and things like that, have a lot of power. May not feel like it when the investors are coming to town, but it is your community. So we hope that you stay really active.
Okay.
But I'd say if you work in an opportunity zone or care about a community, everyone lives pretty close to one. Not everyone, but a lot of people do. Certainly, this is where is it business? You can start a business. You can be a part of a business. You can just be a present community member. And what we're finding is there are some very specific rules also about how much of the not finding this from the regulations, how much of the activity has to take place in the zones. And 50% of the workforce of the activity has to take place there. The revenue, so there's very specific rules and regulations about, this is meant to spur jobs.
Right.
This is meant to spur local investment. So you have to keep at least a good piece of it local.
And I think you had commented earlier when we were talking about the opportunity zones. At this particular time, it's in all 50 states?
Absolutely, yep.
Wow.
The map we had shown earlier, that was in the Washington, D.C. area, but they're across the area.
Okay.
Across the country.
Okay. I think we may have time for another question. Oh, this one should be easy, I hope. Can you provide the website or link where we can get or download the Lean Canvas tool?
Yes, it is on the slides. And also the Medium article that we put up there is a good one in the resources. There we go. Yep. So if you go to businessmodelgeneration.com, and it's open source. And then if you actually click to the resources at the end. One more. So if you go to the introduction to Lean Canvas, that Medium article, I think is a really good one to share with your board. That gives a little more context and then also has the link to the Lean Canvas. But it is open source.
Okay. I think we can squeeze one more in, Sarah. This one should be good. Can you speak more to how to get the board buy-in for alternative sources of revenue?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the key. And what we're finding is that how aligned leadership and the board, staff leadership and the board, how closely you're aligned really is going to dictate how quickly you can or cannot move. So a couple lessons certainly we've learned. One is find your champions on the board. This isn't going to be everyone's. This isn't going to be for everyone's interest or cup of tea, but find the people on the board. You just need a couple who really are interested in this. 2, make sure that your board leadership, particularly if they are not the same people who are interested, are aware that this is something you want to explore and that they have a really good understanding about why. This is a way of resourcing change that is going to be brand new to most people. And so giving them the data, some of the slides we have here, sharing that this isn't a scheme you just thought of, but this is how you are securing your organization's future. And also respecting their place in it and asking for feedback and really honoring the questions they have. There's some real technical pieces here to some of this. They've heard the words impact investing. That feels very risky. It sounds very shiny. It sounds very, why are we doing this? We're feeding the hungry. We are doing housing. Do we have any business doing this? And making sure that boards do carry the risk, making sure that you are either having new board members join or that you have the right expertise around so that they feel safe and their risk is mitigated as board members. And that that it is a learning journey and that everyone is clear that nothing is being done quickly, but everything is being done intentionally, grounded in data, grounded in your organization's mission.
So it sounds like you should be looking for board members that are more entrepreneurial spirited as opposed to those board members where you just require them to give or get.
Yes, you could have said it better myself. If you are lucky enough to live in a place that is entrepreneurial, is friendly to entrepreneurs, they are busy, but see if you can get one on your board. If you're lucky enough to have entrepreneurs on your board, this is going to light them up and excite them in a way that maybe your gala list didn't.
Right.
And this is a great time to go find those business owners, especially the small business owners. They have lessons to share.
Got time for one real quick question. Is there any downside to all of this?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, there's always downside. Well, first of all, it's always a balance, right? The risk you choose is it riskier to try something new or not? I would argue, first of all, that there is no data that suggests that the old ways of resourcing change is going to be true in the future. So while there are absolute downsides I'll get to in a minute, I think that the risk of not exploring things in a thoughtful, non-rushed, intentional manner are outweighed. Just doing it slow and steady wins the race.
I agree. Yeah, because I would say, and just my opinion on this is that, it's probably more risky for the organization not to explore these particular options. Because I would think, worst case scenario, if you're not committing all of the organization's funds to this particular endeavor, I believe the worst that could happen, you just get back to ground zero.
Exactly. Well, that's assuming there is a ground zero to get back to.
True. Very true.
This foundation. But the downsides, let's name them. One, you could spend money that doesn't work out. The risk of failure for these things are real. And I think the downsides are smaller for things like earned revenue. I think once you start talking real impact investing and opportunity zone plays and things like that, the further along that arrow that we had in the risk, where's that slide? There you go. I mean, the further to your market rate, the high risk, there are more downsides on that side.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, you need to be aware of your organization's risk profile. This is going to cost you capacity, mind share, and money. If you're doing this well, it probably means there's something else you are not doing. That's absolutely a downside.
Interesting. Okay.
So, and like anything new, if you are out of compliance, if you don't check your accounting, if you don't check your legal, you could run afoul of real laws. So that's why we put that up front. Pay attention to all of those.
Exactly.
But we just don't see a future in relying on the old ways.
Okay. Let's see, do we have time for another question? It appears as though most of these questions are more housekeeping, so. And again, if you have additional questions after the webinar, please, you do have an opportunity to send them to us, and either Sarah or myself will get to you and respond in a very short period of time. So with that being said, we'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We encourage you to follow us on social media and visit our websites at www.grfcpa.com and 20degrees.com for upcoming events and alerts. And as you could see on this particular slide, we do have an upcoming webinar on June the 19th, Harnessing the Power of Excel, Tips and Tricks for Financial Professionals. Again, this particular webinar will be at 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. And again, you will also receive 1 CPE credit. All right, thank you all again, and I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you so much.